I don't see this a lot, but I do see it, where they simply say, find me a franchise that, makes a ton of money, and I don't care what the industry is, right? I don't care what the model is. And I could say to them, you know what, I can find you a franchise where you're absolutely going to love the numbers and the financial opportunity, but you're going to hate the industry. What's the point? This is a long-term relationship.
Welcome to the Franchise Hot Seat Podcast, where we talk about all things franchising. Now, here's your host, Dr. John P. Hayes.
Welcome to another episode of Franchise Hot Seats Podcast. I'm John Hayes. Happy to have you here. My guest is Jason Killough. I've known Jason for years and years, right out of college. He got into franchising. My client was I Can't Believe It's Yogurt. Jason joined them to do international development, and he did a great job there learning all about franchising. Moved on to other favorite brands of mine and some not so favorite brands of mine as well. And we've been in touch all these years. When I was the CEO at Homevestors, We Buy Ugly Houses, Jason was heading up our franchise development team, and then eventually went out on his own as a franchise consultant or franchise coach based in Dallas. And he is one of the best in doing this kind of a service for people, helping them find the right franchise. And we're going to get into that. But Jason, anything else you want to say in way of introduction?
No, I mean, hey, certainly a real pleasure, John. Thanks for thinking of me. Good to have you on this podcast. I think we're covering a incredibly important topic.
Yeah.
And I'm just excited to share some of my insight with you.
Great. So let's begin at kind of the negative side of things, because this is the hot seat, and I tend to put people on the hot seat some of the time, particularly friends. What are some of the dumber things that franchise prospects have done? And you've been at this now for about 10 years, 12 years of helping people. And you've placed a lot of people in franchises and very successfully. And people who come back and after investing in one, they want to do three, and they want to do, what's the biggest number you've had of people, multi-owners?
You mean in terms of
one person who owns 30 units?
Yeah, I would say in my case, a few of my candidates locked up the rights to 10 to 15 locations.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So you've dealt with a lot of people through 10, 12 years.
Right.
They're not all bright, unfortunately.
Right.
And even if they're bright, sometimes they do things and you scratch your head and say, how could they be so stupid?
Right.
Tell us about some of the things that people have done that weren't the brightest thing to do in pursuing franchises.
John, that's a great question. I kind of look at it sort of a lack of common sense, right? And yeah. I thought about this podcast and sort of the top 10. I probably have more than 10 items I can share with you of things that prospective franchisees do that they shouldn't do. Well, the very first thing that came to mind is I often see that prospective franchisees do not want to follow the franchisor's recruitment process, right? In other words, every franchisor has an A to Z recruitment process in place for a reason. That's their objective, to gauge, are you willing to follow my process now before you become a franchisee? Because if you follow my process now in terms of educating yourself on the opportunity, getting to know each other, etc., that's a good sign that you'll probably be a good franchisee and follow my system as a franchise owner. And I run into this more than you may think, especially with franchise prospects, franchise candidates who do not, or who have been evaluating franchises so far. So they kind of know the roadmap, and they want to skip ahead. Their goal is to try to get in front of that FDD, the franchise disclosure document, as quickly as possible, or to get to the financial performance numbers as quickly as possible, to really ultimately, in many cases, get to the existing franchisees. And they sometimes can get pretty creative in circumventing the franchisor, getting their hands on their disclosure documents, maybe even tracking down some existing franchisees. If the franchisor, franchise recruitment department gets wind of that, that's a red flag. So that's one of the first things is follow the franchisor's recruitment process.
Yeah. And, following the recruitment process, is also a good sign to the franchisor and to you that this person will follow a system. Now, some people won't follow a system, and then you scratch your head and say, why do you want to buy a franchise?
100%.
Okay.
And I have to share that with folks. Why would you want to pay the franchisor an initial franchise fee, which can be significant, give up a percentage of your revenue in the form of a royalty and not follow their system? What's the point? Right. Yeah. And there are going to be prospects who need to hear this for sure.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Let's go on to the next one.
Well, they often do not get their decision makers on the calls and involved in the process. So husband-wife teams, partners, relatives. This is where things can blow up very, very quickly. And it doesn't matter. For example, if you're married, and it's a husband that's sort of driving the ship, but really doesn't bring the wife into the mix early on in the process, or vice versa, right? And so it can become frustrating sometimes for the franchisor at some point in the recruitment process, because behind the scenes there's a lot of communication that's going on between partners and spouses, that it's best to get all the decision makers on as many of the calls in the recruitment process as possible. And I often see that candidates want to circumvent that, or they don't want to bring their spouse on, or even if the franchisor representative, the director of franchise development, wants to get the spouse on or the partner on, they sometimes have a challenge. And it's key to try to get them on these calls early and often, because it's a big decision. It's a huge investment, and you got to make sure they're on the same page.
Okay. Let's go to the next one. Number 3.
Well, one of the things I always tell all my candidates as a franchise consultant is you don't want to make a decision on evaluating a franchise by just having a single one call, right? I always encourage every single of my franchise candidates to have at least 2 to 3 calls, touch points, webinars with each franchisor, right? And I get some candidates who don't listen to me necessarily, and they get onto these calls and they have just one call, and they think they know enough to make a decision, an informed business decision, that it's not for them. And in reality, you're only going to get about 25 to 33% of what you're looking to accomplish as a prospective franchisee from one call. Have at least 2, best 3 calls, touch points, webinars as you go through the recruitment process, and then decide, do you like what you hear? Do you want to keep going through the process, or is it time to bow out?
Mm-hmm. And is it just a matter of time, or saving time, or is it the speed of their goal that I want to be in a franchise next month? So
could be a little bit of that. I think a lot of it is they may just hear something on the first call that they think instantly it's not for them. It's not what they thought it was. But I have seen more than you may think when those who went to the second or the third call ended up quickly and drastically changing their mind because they stuck it out. They continued on in the process. Mm-hmm. And in some cases ended up coming at a very low level of interest and ending up purchasing that franchise because they kept an open mind. They took it to at least 2 to 3 touch calls and then ultimately decided that was the right fit for them. So don't come in with this just, hey, one call and I'm out. It does happen sometimes, and sometimes the first call may not go well from both parties' perspective, but that's my counsel.
Okay. Number 4.
They do not deliver on their promises. We used to talk a lot about this at Homevestors as you created the 7 habits of highly successful franchisees and highly successful franchisors. Well, for example, the prospective franchisee, needs to deliver on their promises. I just recently had a franchisor share with me that one of their franchise prospects missed 4 pre-scheduled calls, 4, 3 with the director of franchise development, pre-scheduled calls on the books. 3 times the prospect did not show up, did come back and regroup and apologize. And then so they continued through the process. Then it got to the 4th call with the COO and he didn't show up for that. So I think my ultimate message here to a prospective franchisee is treat people the way you want to be treated, right? Because a franchisor, John, as you would know, would probably look at this as if you've missed 4 calls, A, you're probably not interested. This brand means very little to you. At least that's what they could be thinking. And then B, what are you going to be like as a franchisee?
Exactly.
Like treating your employees, your customers, right? Red flags. But I see a lot of this happening. Certainly life gets in the way. We just had a big ice storm here in Dallas, where I've seen folks had to postpone calls because of that, because they're in lockdown mode, the kids are at home, whatever. But at least if you're the prospective franchisee, communicate with the franchisor, let them know what your intentions are, regroup for the call versus not showing up.
Yeah. Okay, number 5. I think we're at 5. Go ahead.
Yeah, we're at 5, and some of these may kind of blend a little bit together, but they don't start, prospective franchisees don't start the financing conversations early enough in the process. You really need to get the financial train out of the station well before you make a final decision. So some consultants like to introduce their candidates to lenders almost on the first call. My philosophy is I like to have my candidates have maybe 2 or 3 calls with a franchisor, start feeling out the franchisors and the different models. But pretty early in my process, I like to introduce them to lenders. I know franchisors often will introduce them to their lenders because you need to see what's out in the marketplace, what the different financing sources are. And you need to be thinking about that. It's kind of like buying a house, right? When we were at Homevestors, right? As you're looking at houses, and what a realtor would say, hey, things are heating up. You've kind of narrowed it down to your top 2 houses. Have you started talking to some lenders, mortgage companies to buy houses, right? So that's critical.
Yeah. Okay. Number 6.
They don't really necessarily understand upfront what their goals are when they start the franchise search. They don't necessarily know what they want, right? I'm a big believer. We all have our own unique buyer values. We know what's important to us in life and as it relates to potentially a business and a franchise. And I think, some people come to me, I like to use the term, John, industry agnostic. I don't see this a lot, but I do see it, where they simply say, find me a franchise that, makes a ton of money, and I don't care what the industry is, right? I don't care what the model is. And I could say to them, you know what? I can find you a franchise where you're absolutely going to love the numbers and the financial opportunity, but you're going to hate the industry. What's the point? This is a long-term relationship. You're going to be in this franchise for 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years. You better be equally passionate about the industry and the day in, day out, work you're going to be involved with as a franchise owner.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
So I see that happen. I call it the industry agnostic, where even on sort of my intake forms and questionnaires as I interview them, a lot of neutrals to industries versus, hey, let's figure out what's going to get you excited. What industries are going to pique your interest more than others? Let's at least start at a level of, are you more B2B, interested in business to business versus B2C, business to consumer, or do you home based versus truck mobile based versus retail? That's sort of at one level. And then let's start narrowing it down to sort of industry segments. Mm-hmm. And that can be a challenge with some people who really don't know. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Number 7.
I see this happen with, first of all, I would say number 7, I'm going to blend a couple here together, is they must retain a franchise attorney once they have made the decision that that's the franchise they're going to go with and that they've really been offered the franchise by the franchisor. Has to be a franchise attorney, cannot be a random attorney that doesn't have franchise experience, and an attorney who's going to represent them as the buyer of the franchise and who's also going to be really help them understand what they're signing, right? Number 1. But kind of tied to that, sometimes I've seen that perhaps with the help of a franchise attorney, they may try to over-negotiate with the franchisor, come back with extreme red lines on the franchise agreements, the contracts, where ultimately, in some cases, they took it too far, and they tried to negotiate items that the franchisor never would negotiate. Any franchisor that's never been negotiated, perhaps that's a major material event that potentially could hurt the transaction at the end. And sometimes I'm seeing transactions fall apart because of that.
Okay, good point. Yeah. When they get an attorney in some of these cases, do they then back off and they don't read the FDD, and they should read the FDD?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, they don't read the FDD. That's a mistake if you don't read the FDD. As we know, the FDD, the franchise disclosure document, is written in layman term. Generally, any one person should be able to generally understand what's written in the disclosure document. Yeah. But there will be some type of candidates who get so excited, they figure, hey, there's no changes I can make. I figure I'll make money. This is the place where I'm looking for fun and excitement in this franchise, and let's just move forward. Sort of an heavily emotional type buyer. Right. And so they should, and most franchisor representatives have FDD reviews where at some point in the recruitment process, they go through any questions that the prospective franchisee has with the candidate. But even if they're satisfied with the answers and that the franchisor has provided, I almost insist as a consultant that they still need to retain a attorney just to make sure they're not missing anything. There are no surprises.
And does the cost of an attorney
often grateful for that?
Yeah. Does the cost of an attorney get in the way there?
If they're at the point of, let's just say, I always like to advise my candidates, you want to be at least at 80% sure, right, that that's the franchise you're going with. You're pretty much committed to a discovery day. You're pretty confident you've either been offered the franchise or will get offered the franchise. At that point, to engage and pull trigger with the franchise attorney to review the disclosure document. At that point in the process, I find that most of my candidates, most buyers, do not object to the fee unless it's an exorbitant fee, and that fee can range for franchise attorneys.
And what do you find it ranges from, a low to high, for a franchise attorney?
I've seen anywhere from as low as $750 flat fee to $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 flat fee. My counsel would be make sure you go flat fee. A, B, make sure it's a franchise attorney. Don't turn this into an hourly billable event where it's a little open-ended on what the final bill is. Because I've heard some horror stories of franchise prospects paying up to $5,000, $10,000 to a franchise attorney, and it ended up going nowhere, and they ended up not purchasing the franchise. And in that case, the only person that won could have been the franchise attorney.
Mm-hmm. So number 8 on the list of dumbest things people do or have done.
They don't necessarily or they don't properly validate with existing franchisees, right? They don't ask the right questions per se to when they have the opportunity to validate and speak to existing franchisees. Some will just sit back and listen to the other questions that are being asked by other prospective franchisees. I think I sometimes have to advise my candidates, don't be afraid to ask the tough questions, especially the financial questions that some other folks are not asking. Now they typically, most franchisors, as we know, have an item 19, a financial performance representation. So they've reviewed in the disclosure document the numbers, but now they need to validate those numbers with the franchisees. So go beyond just asking sort of broad macro type questions to, hey, let's talk about your numbers. Let's talk about your financials, because the franchisee really doesn't have restrictions in that sense on what they can or cannot share financially with the candidate. And the other thing is, if a franchisee, a prospective franchisee is validating with a existing franchise owner, be courteous, be respectful to that franchisee's time. they need to understand that these franchisees are taking those calls while they're running very significant businesses, and taking, they're losing money, perhaps, the existing franchisees, because they want to talk to these existing franchisees. So thank them afterwards for their time.
They don't get paid for the existing franchisee isn't getting paid.
They are not.
And if they are, it's got to be in the disclosure document.
That's right. So approach it with gratitude, right?
Yeah.
Approach your conversations with gratitude always. And also kind of back to gratitude. If you, the prospective franchisee, decide that a particular franchise that your franchisor, franchise opportunity that you're looking at is not the right fit, you have created some sort of relationship with that franchisor representative. Don't just walk away and let them, never return their calls, even though you're not going with the franchise. Send them a nice email saying, hey, you know what? I really enjoyed our time together. You were very courteous. I learned a lot, just not the right fit. Let's part ways. I think you don't want to burn bridges. Franchisors will remember that. Take that same practice and thank them for their time as well. That's how I would look at it.
Okay. Number 9.
This kind of goes a little bit perhaps to the discovery day itself. Again, we talked about having all the decision makers, involved in the recruitment process, ideally in a perfect world. But especially, and I'm a big fan that, let's say it's two partners, two spouse, husband and wife team, and they're about to go out to a discovery day. Both should go, even if, let's say, the husband is going to keep his job while the wife owns and operates the franchise. The husband goes, second set of eyes, and so forth. And so, number one, I think that's really important. I think a franchisor should almost require that, or if they have to be flexible. For example, just recently I had a candidate attend a discovery day, and the husband, and she's going to be she's sort of the driver on moving forward with the franchise. Well, she physically went to the franchisor's headquarters for Discovery Day. The husband could not make it because of childcare and all that, but they did make it a requirement that during the Discovery Day, the husband zoomed in for portions of the Discovery Day. That's a reasonable compromise. That shows that both parties are together. The other thing I have seen, rarely, but I've seen on occasion, is the prospect argues with the franchisor, or they argue with themselves. I mean, how many discovery days have we done together at Homebusters years ago? We Buy Ugly Houses, where we've seen some very unique scenarios, right? And I had a franchisor tell me that they had a prospect come to their discovery day a couple years ago, and the husband and wife actually got into an argument with each other in front of the CEO, the founder, and the entire leadership team. In essence, the wife really wasn't fully on board, kind of may have felt like she was being dragged into the discovery day, and all the emotions came out. You're like a psychologist there. All the emotions came out in front of the franchisor, and they ultimately decided this is a major red flag. We do not feel comfortable. They got to work this piece out first, offering them the franchise, right? Yeah. But it happens.
Yep. And number 10.
Number 10, and this is sort of maybe happens on occasion. They lie. A prospective franchisee lies on their paperwork, for example. Yeah. For example, maybe early, I remember seeing this once years ago at Homebusters. We saw on what we called the intake form, the request for consideration, one of the questions we would ask is, are you a felon? Yes or no, right? Well, it's self-directed. We can answer whatever we want to answer, right? And a candidate said no, right? And then fast forward to we're getting to the point of doing the final due diligence, which is part of that is doing a background check. In the background check, there's a felony and there's battery. Well, don't lie. Don't lie on your intake forms, your applications. It's common sense. 99.9% of candidates I work with do not, but every once in a while you do see these things that happen behind the scenes.
Yeah. You got a bonus item, number 11.
Bonus, wow. Geez, well, you might need to spur my thoughts there on bonus items. I mean, there's just there's so much, so much involved in this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big decision for a potential candidate.
Yeah.
Lots of moving parts. Follow the system. It's all about a relationship ultimately. I like to use the marriage analogy, right? You're courting each other, you're dating each other, you're ultimately deciding, are we going to get married to each other or not? And so the recruitment process, the evaluation process simply doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah. All good points. And so something I want to ask you about as a franchise consultant, which is a little bit of a hot seat item. We say to prospective franchisees, this doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to pay Jason a fee. He's doing this work on behalf of the franchisor. And the franchisor is going to pay a fee. I don't know if that's always clear to prospective franchisees. And then if you say, well, where's the franchisor taking the money from to pay the fee? Oh, well, out of your upfront fee, your franchise fee. If it was a $50,000 franchise fee and Jason gets $25,000, not directly, but indirectly, that was my $25,000 that maybe the franchisor could have used to reinvest in my education, my training, supporting me. Are they going to now spend less time because they had to give up part of the franchise fee to my coach or my consultant? Talk about that.
Yeah, I don't see that last piece you talk about, franchisors taking the, hey, because we had to pay a consultant, a broker, a fee, we're going to treat that potential franchisee any differently. I'm going to tell you, I haven't seen that. If you have, you certainly need to let me know about that. But that particular piece, I've not. I tend to be upfront. You're 100% right. I am upfront. I tell them not only verbally that there's no fee that they pay me, but I also have, as a franchise consultant, a rather significant consulting agreement that they sign with me that also reiterates that there's no fee that they pay me. But if I end up helping them find the right fit franchise that they end up purchasing, it's the franchisor that pays the fee. And so whether they are poking around on the internet and they find that franchise on their own, or whether I introduce them to that same exact franchise, from their perspective, at least, their outlay, their investment's going to be the same.
Yeah.
Right. And ideally, the franchisor should always treat every potential franchisee the same way, whether they came organically or from a consultant. Right.
But what go
ahead.
What the fee process suggests, at least, and this has always somewhat bothered me about the franchise consultant network or program or system, which I fully support. You save people a lot of time. You educate them right up front. There's no guarantee to you that they're going to be awarded a franchise that you're going to get a fee for. So you're a little bit at risk there as well. But it at least suggests that Jason's going to want to make sure, to whatever extent he can, that he gets paid. So he's going to lead me to franchises that he knows will not only pay him a fee, but possibly pay him the highest fee or a higher fee. And then are you tempted by the pure economics to guide me toward the higher paying franchisors? Rather than getting a $15,000 commission, you could get a $40,000 commission, but maybe the $15,000 commission franchise would have been better for me. How do you justify that?
Yeah, I mean, I hear that. That's definitely a discussion item, but it is absolutely 100%, at least from my perspective, the wrong approach. At the end of the day, yes, of course, ultimately I'm paid by the franchisor, but at the end of the day, my role is to absolutely help my candidate find the best fit franchise. So I don't even focus, honestly and candidly, on commissions myself, right? I'm there to help them find the right fit. I often, find out very much at the tail end what exactly that commission is going to be, because that's really not on my mind. Right. But I can see where you're coming from, where some may say, hey, why would I show a franchise that pays, double the commission in the same industry versus another? Right. It's the wrong mindset. It certainly could be out there. I think it is out there at times, but that's not the approach I take.
Do franchisors ever say, hey, Jason, if you'll bring some people to us, we'll sweeten the deal. Instead of giving you a $30,000 commission, it's going to be a $36,000 commission. Does that happen?
Well, yeah, sure. But that's okay in my mind. Franchisors want to grow. They might throw out certain incentives that they make aware to the broker network. But even if they throw out that incentive, still not going to change the way I do things and my focus on the candidate and helping them find the right fit franchise. But it happens. I don't see it as a bad thing, overall. But it's not it wouldn't, again, be my reason just because they throw out an incentive to necessarily go out and show that concept unless it's really going to be the right fit. I mean, it's all about finding the right fit. And if you find that wrong fit, as you know, what good does that do anybody?
Yeah. How many people have you said no to where you figured out, you know what, Jim, franchising is just not for you based on what you and I have discussed. You're not a good fit. You do that very often?
More than you may think, especially early on in the conversation. You want to feel them out on what their motivation is, what their pain is, why they want to be a business owner. Do they have access to any form of capital? Do they understand that this is a paradigm shift? Many folks who, as you know, are, transitioning out of corporate America, they're going from sort of an income-based mindset to, hey, it's money out before it's money in. And so I vet and I do a lot of work up front to make sure that we can, make sure they're going to, again, follow my system and be fully engaged through profiling,
how quickly,
et cetera.
How quickly and how well do you get to know a prospect? And for example, do you give them assessments to?
Yeah. And that's the thing. I spend a lot of time getting to know them up front. I'm a huge believer, put the work up front. And ultimately, I think you'll see the positive results. And so I need an equal commitment from them. When I walk them through my process, I need them to commit to my process. So we have the equivalent at our organization of an upfront e-quiz to measure their risk tolerance. And that sometimes will vet folks out. You mentioned how often do we turn down people? We've been administrating this entrepreneur quiz for 20 plus years, sort of low, middle, high, low, super cautious, ultra conservative. If somebody scores low, from our experience, they usually just don't buy businesses or franchises. And based on score alone, I have turned people down just by talking it through with them because they end up realizing, you know what, it's probably not for me. Middle, good fit for a franchise. Here's it is your business. Here's the system. Follow the system. High, which we see on the flip side, though, sometimes you get those super entrepreneurs. We saw that at Homevestors, for example, quite a bit, uber independent, that on the flip side, I've had to tell some folks, you know what, this is just not going to be a good fit for you. You already own an independent business. How are you going to go from running your own independent business with your name on the marquee to now being, a franchisee of whatever brand, right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah. It depends. We turn down all the time. I do, certainly.
Yeah. And how often, if at all, do you get to a point where you discover everything's looking good, but they lied to you or misled you or just never talked about the fact that they don't have enough money to buy this particular franchise, maybe hoping you're going to help them out? Well,
you can generally get a sense when I get to the point of collecting their financials. I collect a rather significant intake form. I evaluate their assets, their liabilities. I really, you almost have to be like a financial advisor in a sense, and really dig into cash positions, stock, retirement funds, home equity, debt, etc. I've been doing this so long that I have a pretty clear indicator up front, what it's looking like probably for them financially, or if they're lacking in cash or whatever it may be that I think won't meet minimum thresholds to find a decent franchise, I will very quickly introduce them to a lender. Just yesterday, I had to tell a candidate that he said, look, I'm going to keep my job and I don't have any money. At least I don't think I have any money. And so I said, maybe in this case, before we start the process together, let's see if you can even pre-qualify for any sort of SBA loan, and start there and see if they come back with anything. Mm-hmm. And then we at least know. That does happen on occasion.
How many people borrow money to invest in a franchise? What's the percentage of your
who borrow? I would say the vast majority, use some form of borrowed money financing. They get SBA loans. They engage in the IRA rollover, where you can.
How popular is that now? The rollover?
It's rather popular. I mean, the stock market's a little wobbly and goes up and down. Yeah. But it's I think that's one of those forms of financing that 99.9% of my candidates have never even heard about that, and instinctually, when they hear about it up front, they don't want to use retirement funds. But when they find out the benefits, that hey, this is actually real, and you can roll your regular IRA tax and penalty free into a newly formed C corporation to fund a business or a franchise, they warm up, and they can warm up rather quickly to that form of financing. Yeah. There are leverage lines out there, home equity lines of credit, although that's gone up, the rates have gone up there, but people come to the table where they locked in home equity lines of credit prior to the rates going up. So I see cash. It all depends on the investment range. Yeah. Okay. The lowest investment franchise that you represent, what would, you don't have to tell me the brand, but what's the amount? But I don't know if it's necessarily the franchise that I represent. I think you want to have at least access to $50,000 at minimum, to find a, worthwhile franchise or business opportunity. And I think that's also generally a guideline of what lenders are looking for SBA loans, is at least $50K down payment, or willing to come up with that, and you can demonstrate that.
Yeah. Okay, great. And how do people get in touch with you, Jason, if they want to talk to you about franchising?
Yeah, I mean, certainly you can go to our website. I'm a franchise consultant with a company called The Entrepreneur Authority, eauth.com. That's EAUTH.com. You'll see my profile there. You can email me at jkillough, KILLOUGH at EAUTH.com. So jkillough at eauth.com. I guess I'll give my 800 line, 1-800-390-FRAN, FRAN. 1-800-390-FRAN, 3726. Happy to talk to anybody about this whole process.
Yeah, good. Well, I've often sent people to you because, as you know, we've known each other a long time. I know that you deal with people with integrity, and I appreciate that. You're not going to twist anybody's arm, and you're not going to chase them down forever. You don't have time to do that, for one thing, and it's undignified to have to chase people. You're very successful at what you do, and you'll take good care of people, and I always appreciate that.
Thank you very much. No, I do appreciate that. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. Well, thank you for spending some time with me out of a busy day. I appreciate it, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you very much, John. Take care. Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in to the Franchise Hot Seat Podcast with Dr. John P. Hayes. Tune in next time for more conversation around all things franchising.